The afternoon my son walked me through the doors of Riverside Manor, I knew something fundamental had changed between us. Not from what he said, but from the way his hand rested on my shoulder. Too firm. Too long. The gesture of someone securing cargo rather than guiding a father. The lobby smelled like boiled vegetables and industrial cleaner. A woman behind the desk smiled without moving her eyes. My son signed papers while I stood beside a walker I did not need, holding a duffel bag containing 3 days of clothing. He had packed it himself that morning while I showered. When I asked why we were leaving the house, he said the words slowly, as if I might not understand. "It's time, Dad. We talked about this." We had not talked about this. I remember the sound of the pen clicking shut. The woman slid a folder across the desk and told my son they would take excellent care of me. He nodded and thanked her. Then he turned to me with that same weighted hand on my shoulder and said he would visit soon. I watched him walk back through the glass doors into September sunlight. He did not look back. That was 4 months ago. I am 68 years old. My wife died 2 years ago from pancreatic cancer that gave us 4 months' notice and no appeal. I had been a systems analyst for 31 years before retirement. I know how organizations function. I know how money moves. I understand documentation and quiet observation. These skills do not fade with age. They sharpen. At Riverside Manor, I learned quickly that the facility operated on 2 levels. The first level was presented to families during tours and admissions. Clean common areas, activities calendars posted in the hallway, staff members who smiled and used first names. The second level emerged after the families left, medications delayed or forgotten, meal portions that shrank each month, night staff who responded to call buttons on their own schedule, if at all. I watched. I did not complain. Complaining establishes you as a problem. Problems receive less attention, not more. Instead, I observed routines. I noted which residents had family visitors and which did not. I learned that the administration treated the latter group as inventory rather than people. I also learned that my son had signed papers giving the facility limited power of attorney over my financial affairs for the purpose of managing my monthly fees. That was the inciting betrayal, not the placement itself, which I might have understood if framed with honesty, but the quiet legal maneuvering. The forms signed without my knowledge while I was still living in my own home. The transfer of authority presented as a necessity rather than a theft. I discovered this during my second week at Riverside. A woman named Teresa worked the front desk on weekday afternoons. She was competent and kind, which made her an outlier among the staff. One afternoon, I asked her a simple question about my account balance. She hesitated, then suggested, "I speak with the administrator." I pressed gently. She looked at me with something close to pity and said the administrator handled all financial matters for residents under care agreements. I thanked her and returned to my room. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and felt the first stirrings of real anger. Not the hot flash of insult, but the cold burn of understanding. My son had not placed me here for my safety or care. He had placed me here to control the money, my retirement accounts, my pension, the house. The house was paid off, market value somewhere near $400,000 in a decent neighborhood with good schools. My son had been living there since his divorce 3 years ago. A temporary arrangement, he said, just until he got back on his feet. I had not minded. He was my son, but temporary had stretched into permanence, and now I understood why. I began making phone calls. The facility provided a house phone in the common area, old and institutional, but functional. I called my bank first. I confirmed that my accounts were still in my name, but that Riverside Manor had been granted limited signatory access for fee withdrawals. I asked how this was possible. The representative explained that I had signed the authorization myself. I had not signed anything. I requested copies of all documents bearing my signature. The bank agreed to mail them. Then I called my attorney. Roger had handled my will and my wife's estate. He was 71 and still sharp. I explained the situation in factual terms. He asked if I felt competent to manage my own affairs. I said yes. He asked if I had been coerced or misled. I said yes. He told me to sit tight and not to confront anyone yet. Documentation first, strategy second. The documents arrived 1 week later in a plain envelope. Teresa handed them to me with a question in her eyes, but she did not ask it. I took the envelope to my room and opened it on the small desk by the window. Inside were authorization forms with my name printed at the top and a signature at the bottom. The signature was not mine. It was close, practiced. But I have signed my name thousands of times across decades of paperwork. I know the specific tilt and pressure of my own hand. This was a forgery. I sat with that knowledge for a long time. Outside, the autumn afternoon faded into early dusk. I could hear someone's television through the thin wall, a game show with canned applause. I thought about my son sitting at my kitchen table, practicing my signature on scrap paper until it looked convincing enough. I thought about the effort that required, the calculation. I felt something close to grief, but sharper. That night, I did not sleep well. I lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the building, footsteps in the hallway, a distant cough, the hum of industrial air handling. I thought about my wife and how she would have handled this. She had been a teacher, 2nd grade. She believed in consequences delivered with clarity and without cruelty. I decided to follow her example. The next morning, I asked Teresa if I could speak with the administrator. She made a call and told me Mr. Harmon would see me at 2 o'clock. I thanked her and spent the intervening hours preparing. I did not bring the forged documents. I brought only questions. Mr. Harmon's office was small and windowless. He was 40-something with thinning hair and a tie that had seen better days. He smiled and gestured to a chair. I sat. He asked how I was settling in. I said fine. Then I asked about the financial arrangement. He opened a file on his desk and explained that my son had established the care agreement to ensure consistent payment and proper management of my needs. He used the word needs 3 times. Each time it sounded more like a diagnosis than a description. I asked if he had verified my signature on the authorization forms. He looked at me for a moment, his smile tightening slightly. He said everything had been handled properly and that my son had provided all necessary documentation. I nodded and thanked him for his time. As I stood to leave, I asked one more question. I asked if Riverside Manor was for sale. He blinked. I repeated the question. He said the facility was privately owned and not currently on the market. I said that was good to know. Then I left. He did not call my son immediately. I know because I watched his reactions over the following days. He became more attentive. He greeted me in the hallways. He asked how I was doing with a new edge of concern. He was trying to determine if I was a problem or simply confused. I gave him nothing to work with. I smiled. I attended activities. I played chess with another resident named Frank, who had been a mailman for 30 years and still remembered every street in his old route. 2 weeks later, I received a visit from my son. He arrived on a Sunday afternoon with a bag of apples and a look of practiced concern. We sat in the common area. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. He asked if I needed anything. I said no. He told me he had been busy with work but would try to visit more often. I nodded. Then I asked him a direct question. I asked if he had signed any documents on my behalf. He paused. His face did something small and quick. Then he said yes, but only to make the transition easier, only to help. I said I understood. I did not mention the forgery. I did not raise my voice. I simply thanked him for the apples and told him I was tired. He left 20 minutes later. I watched him through the window as he walked to his car. He looked back once at the building, then drove away. I knew he would call the administrator. I knew the administrator would reassure him. I knew they both believed they were managing a situation under control. They were not. I called Roger the next day. I told him about the forged signature and the limited power of attorney. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I said not yet. I said I wanted to reverse the authorization first and regain full control of my accounts. He said that was possible but would require a court filing to prove fraud. I asked how long. He said 4 to 6 weeks if we moved quickly. I told him to start the process. Then I asked him a different question. I asked if he knew anyone in commercial real estate. He did. Her name was Linda Marsh. She was 56 and had been brokering healthcare properties for 20 years. Roger introduced us by phone. I explained that I was interested in acquiring a nursing facility. She asked why. I said I wanted to ensure quality care and proper management. She asked if I had capital. I said yes. She asked if I had a specific property in mind. I said yes. I gave her the address of Riverside Manor. There was a pause on the line. Then she asked if I was currently a resident there. I said yes. She laughed, not unkindly, but with genuine surprise. She said it was an unusual situation. I said I understood. I asked if it was possible. She said anything was possible with enough capital and the right approach. I told her I had both. She said she would make inquiries. The legal process to reverse the fraudulent authorization took 5 weeks. Roger filed a motion with supporting evidence. The court reviewed the documents. A handwriting analyst confirmed the forgery. The judge ruled in my favor and issued an order rescinding the limited power of attorney. The bank received notification and removed Riverside Manor's access to my accounts. Mr. Harmon received the same notification and called my son. My son did not visit. During those 5 weeks, Linda worked the acquisition quietly. Riverside Manor was owned by a holding company based in Ohio. The facility had been underperforming for 3 years. Occupancy had dropped. State inspections had noted deficiencies. The owners were motivated to sell. Linda arranged a meeting with their representative. I did not attend. Instead, I sent Linda with an offer structured through a limited liability company I established with Roger's help. The name on the company was neutral and anonymous. The offer was fair, but not generous. The owners accepted within 10 days. Closing took another 4 weeks. During that time, I continued living at Riverside Manor as a resident. I paid my monthly fees from my own accounts. I attended meals and activities. I played chess with Frank. I observed the staff and noted patterns of negligence. I documented everything in a small notebook I kept in my desk drawer. Names, dates, incidents. I did this methodically without anger. Anger clouds judgment. Clarity requires discipline. The day the sale closed, I met with Linda and Roger in a conference room downtown. We signed the final documents. Ownership transferred at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. I became the sole member of the LLC that now owned Riverside Manor. Linda shook my hand and said she had never seen anything like it. Roger smiled and said my wife would have been proud. I thanked them both and asked Linda to schedule a meeting with the facility administrator for Monday morning. She said she would handle it. That weekend, I stayed at Riverside Manor. I did not leave. I did not tell anyone about the change in ownership. I simply waited. On Sunday evening, I sat in the common area and watched the news with Frank. He asked if I had family visiting for Thanksgiving. I said no. He nodded and said family was complicated. I agreed. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully, pressed slacks, button-down shirt, a cardigan my wife had given me years ago. I walked to the administrator's office at 9 o'clock. The door was open. Mr. Harmon sat at his desk reviewing paperwork. He looked up and smiled, that tight administrative smile. Then, he saw Linda standing behind me in the hallway. His smile faltered. Linda introduced herself and explained that ownership of the facility had transferred. She explained that the new owner had requested a meeting with all senior staff. Mr. Harmon stood slowly. He asked who the new owner was. Linda stepped aside and gestured to me. I walked into the office and sat in the chair across from his desk. I did not smile. I simply looked at him and waited. The color left his face in stages, first confusion, then recognition, then something close to panic. He started to speak. I raised one hand, not aggressively, just enough to signal silence. Then I told him that his employment was terminated effective immediately. I told him he had 1 hour to collect his personal belongings and vacate the premises. I told him that if he contacted any current staff or residents in a manner that could be construed as retaliation or interference, I would pursue legal action. He tried to speak again. I stood and walked out. Linda remained behind to oversee the transition. Over the next 3 hours, I terminated 4 additional staff members: the night supervisor who routinely ignored call buttons, the nurse who documented medication rounds that never happened, the dietary manager who had been systematically reducing portion sizes to pad the budget, the assistant administrator who had helped my son with the paperwork and had never questioned the forged signature. Each conversation was brief and professional. I explained the reason for termination. I provided severance equal to 2 weeks' pay. I escorted each person to the door. By noon, the facility was operating with a reduced staff and a great deal of uncertainty. I called a meeting in the common area, all remaining staff and all residents who could attend. I stood at the front of the room and introduced myself. I explained that I was the new owner. I explained that my priority was restoring quality care and proper management. I explained that there would be changes, but that those changes would be implemented fairly and transparently. I asked for questions. Teresa raised her hand. She asked if she still had a job. I said yes. I said she was one of the reasons I believed the facility could be salvaged. She nodded and looked down at her hands. Frank raised his hand. He asked if the food would get better. Several people laughed. I said yes. I said we would be bringing in a new dietary manager and revising the meal program. He said that was good news. The meeting ended quietly. That afternoon, I called my son. He answered on the third ring. I did not greet him. I simply said I knew about the forgery. I said I knew he had been living in my house rent-free while placing me in substandard care. I said the authorization had been revoked and that I had resumed full control of my finances. There was a long silence. Then he started to explain. He said he had been trying to help. He said he thought I needed structure. He said the house was expensive to maintain and he was just trying to manage things responsibly. I let him finish. Then I told him he had 30 days to vacate the house. I told him that if he did not leave voluntarily, I would pursue eviction through the court. I told him he was no longer welcome to visit me at Riverside Manor or anywhere else. He said I was being unreasonable. He said he was my son. I said being a son was not a license for theft or betrayal. Then I ended the call. He did not contest the eviction. He moved out within 3 weeks and left no forwarding address. I had the locks changed and hired a property manager to handle the house while I remained at Riverside. I was not ready to return yet. I had work to do. Over the following months, I rebuilt the facility from the inside. I hired a new administrator with 20 years of experience in elder care. I brought in an independent consultant to audit our procedures and compliance. I increased staff wages by 12% and implemented quarterly training programs. I revised the activities calendar and added physical therapy options. I contracted with a new food service provider and worked with a nutritionist to design menus that balanced cost with quality. The changes were not easy. Some staff resisted. A few more resigned. But slowly, the culture shifted. Residents noticed, families noticed, state inspectors noticed. Our occupancy rate began to climb. Within 6 months, we were operating at 85% capacity and had a waiting list for the first time in years. Frank stayed in his room next to mine. We played chess twice a week. He never asked why I had done what I did. He simply said once that it took guts to burn a bridge with your own child. I told him I had not burned the bridge. I had simply stopped pretending it was safe to cross. I remained a resident at Riverside Manor for another year. Not because I needed care, but because I wanted to see the work through. I wanted to ensure the changes held. I wanted to prove to myself that institutions could be repaired if someone was willing to stay and do the work. Eventually, I moved back into my house. The property manager had maintained it well. Walked through empty rooms and felt the absence of my wife in every corner. But I also felt something else, a kind of clarity, a sense that I had honored her by refusing to accept betrayal as inevitable or forgiveness as mandatory. I still own Riverside Manor. I visit twice a month to meet with the administrator and review operations. Teresa still works the front desk. She always greets me by name. Frank is still there, playing chess with a new resident who used to be a mechanic. The facility runs well now. Not perfectly, but honestly. My son and I have not spoken in 2 years. I do not expect that to change. Some betrayals are too fundamental to repair. Some relationships end not with violence or drama, but with the simple recognition that trust, once shattered, cannot be rebuilt through apology alone. I am 70 now. I live in my house. I manage my finances. I make my own decisions. I learned that age does not require surrender, that competence does not expire, that the most important boundary you can enforce is the one between patience and submission. I sleep well now, the kind of sleep that comes from knowing you responded to betrayal with strategy rather than rage, that you protected yourself without becoming cruel, that you built something better from the ruins of what was broken. And on quiet evenings, when I sit in the living room, where my wife and I once planned our retirement, I think about the choice I made, to observe rather than react, to plan rather than protest, to use the skills I had spent a lifetime building, not in service of revenge, but in service of restoring dignity. Mine, and everyone else who had been reduced to inventory in a system that valued profit over care. That's enough.